Hey everybody, how are you? My name is Harlan Coben, and to be here talking with my dear friend and colleague Nelson DeMille.
Hi Harlan, how you
Hear
doing?
me okay? Good. We're supposed to do an introduction. If you're here and you don't know who Nelson DeMille is, you're probably. But Nelson is the best-selling author of 22 novels, number one bestsellers, all been huge hits, dating from I won't name them all, Cathedral, Charm School, Word of Honor, Gold Coast, Corey series, and all of the rest. And we are thrilled. Is it I think it's a John Corey book that the Maze is it the 8th?
Yeah, this is the 8th book. John Corey began, like 25 years ago with a book called Plum Island, which was supposed to be a standalone because I had never done the series before. And but it did so well, like 18 weeks on New York Times list and reader mail and great reviews. And publisher said, you ought to do a series. So I said, sounds like a good idea. I saw the royalty statement. I said, yeah, we're going to do a series.
That was actually my first question to you was when you created John Corey, who's going to be a series character? The answer is obviously no. Do you have any idea how many? Did you know anything else about it, or just say one at a time?
Yeah, I think maybe the Plum Island might have been my 9th or 10th book, and they were all standalones up to then. Like I said, so when it became a series, I didn't know what to do with this guy because doing a series, it's got its challenges. People think it's easy because you're using the same characters and the same, venues and all that. But no, you gotta go back and mention some old cases and. This guy's dragging more baggage along in every book, and he's got girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, and it's got to be mentioned in every book without the reader thinking, "Hey, I'm missing something. I have to read these in order." No, you don't. I mean, hopefully they all read like standalones, but the cases that he mentions, should pique your interest. I found it a challenge, but I like to read series. I just never wrote one up to that time. So when publisher suggested I do this, I said, okay, second book is good, third book. I wasn't quite sure about series, but here I am in number 8, and every one of them has been either number 1 or somewhere on the top of the list. People respond to this character. Sometimes that magic happens, like with your Simon Boulevard. I mean, the magic. Why I have no idea. Like why do readers respond to a character to the extent that they want to see him or her again and again and again. And as you know, the author often gets tired of the character. Conan Doyle famously killed Sherlock Holmes because he was sick of him, and he pushed him off Reichenbach Falls. But Holmes had to come back because the fans demanded it. And sometimes I feel like killing John Corey, but you don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So yeah, I'm okay with John for a while.
Because I write both standalones and series like you're doing now. I sort of say that when you're doing a standalone, it's a completely blank canvas. When a series, a lot of stuff is filled in, stuff you like, but that's somewhat limiting. Do you find?
I'm sorry, Harlan, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Do you find it all limiting versus? Yeah. Do you find it limiting in the sense that part of the canvas is filled?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent. I mean, the standalones. I mean, I think maybe you feel the same way. The standalones they're easier in some ways because you have a beginning, a middle, an end, and you're done. You're never going to see this character again. Hopefully not. You want to tell the story, the best way you can, and you want the reader to respond to it. And sometimes it's not the character. Sometimes it's the story or the venue or the milieu of the book that doesn't really lend itself to a series. When you have there's so many cop series because obviously everyone is episodic, and a cop is gonna go on from case to case, and this is inherent in a series, is that your character should have some kind of an occupation that doesn't that lets him get into trouble every book, as opposed to some people try to stretch it. Agatha Christie, there was some of her characters who like Miss Marple, who lived in a small village where it seemed like there was a murder a week that she solved, and that was a little bit unrealistic. So, when I hit on John Corey, again, as a standalone, but then I realized I could just, use this guy for another book, and there's always going to be some case. The standalones really, then you have, with the standalone, you also have a sequel, not a series, but a sequel to the book. And I wrote Gold Coast, and I think it's my best book, and got great reviews, and compared it to Scott Fitzgerald's Gatsby and compared me to Edith Wharton. Doesn't get any better, right? So I wanted to leave it alone, and I did leave it alone for almost 20 years. But the kept saying, we want a sequel. We want to see these characters again. And then a sequel. A sequel is like, the only sequel that ever worked in my mind was Godfather 2. But beyond that, you've already told the story. If you told a great story, leave it alone. But I got talked into a sequel, which was The Gatehouse, and it was good. It was good. It wasn't great. Gold Coast was great. Sequel is good, and that's usually the way it goes. And I can't think of a sequel to any book or any movie that might have been better than the original, except maybe Godfather 2. So I don't think I'll ever do a sequel again, but I can see picking up some of these other characters and continuing maybe with a series, because people want to see some of my characters come back again. I have one, which is Paul Brenner, which was he was the main character in General's Daughter. He was played by John Travolta in the film General's Daughter, and I did bring him back in a book. I kind of brought him back. I brought him back in Upcountry. Then I gave him a cameo appearance in one of the John Corey books, The Panther. Could that be a series? Probably could be a series. But you kind of do market surveys in your head. I do. I say, you're writing for the reader. You're not writing for the editor. You're not writing for the agent. You're not writing for yourself. You're writing for the reader. And you say, what does the reader want to say? And because of the internet, and because of fan mail, you're getting it through your website, you can do a market survey every week. You just read the fan mail and see what people are looking for, and you can kind of get a consensus. That doesn't drive the whole idea, because your publisher editors have seen all that fan mail. So if you say, I want to do another John Corey, like I did in this case, they were like, really already did 7. Well, they want to do another one because everybody's saying John Corey. So I did it, and it's The Maze, and it's as good as, if not better than, it's probably as good as the first one, which is Plum Island. So, and it is sort of a sequel to Plum Island. The Maze picks up kind of where Plum Island left off some years later, and that was kind of interesting too. I had fun with that. Did that answer your question?
Let me just know, there's Premier Collectibles.com Maze. You see that thing there? That site to buy.
Yeah,
your
I
copy.
don't see it, but
There's our advertising.
oh yeah.
I got to do a little bit of that for you as well. So let's discuss. So I know we always hate the question, where do you get your ideas? But I'm going to come. What was the seed? It's interesting that you're very readers tell you, which is really cool. But what was the seed that started this particular first thing? You have John Corey. You want to write another Corey book. Then what's the next step?
Well, the next step, is what is he doing? With a police procedural kind of thing, or a private detective or whatever, you can come up with almost anything, But by now,
3, 2, 1, go. I'm going to move. We have from readers who have written over here, Nelson, and here. Well, they're asking what you're writing, James from North Carolina is asking that I know you handwrite, for example. Why don't you tell a little how you do it? Like, your mornings, how's it go? How's your work day go?
Yeah, that's a question everybody has. Everybody's different too. I once asked our mutual friend Mary Higgins Clark what her right. I think all the authors ask you with their writing. Mary said she gets up at the crack of dawn, has a cup of tea, and writes, and then she's done by lunch, so she can have lunch with her friends. Well, at the crack of dawn, I don't even know my own name, so I don't do any writing in the morning. But I generally get to the office around 10 o'clock or so. But I do errands in the morning. I do paperwork, I do my emails, I do what I got to do. By 12 o'clock, I'm sitting down and I'm writing. I don't know how to type. Never learned. Don't want to know how to type. It's and I think too the process of the typing kind of gets between you and your brain and the creative process. And we all learn how to type, a little bit, but I'm not fast enough. But we all learned how to write in the first grade with a teacher gave us a pencil and a piece of paper and said, "Write." This is how we learn how to write. So I use legal pads. I use number one pencils because they're soft. And I do a first draft handwritten. I do a second draft handwritten. And sometimes I do a third draft handwritten. Then I give it to my assistant who can read my handwriting. Not many people can, but she can. And she types it. And then I can play with it on the computer if I want, or I can edit it on the printed out page, and then I give it back to her. So it's a process. I do about 6 drafts, maybe 3 handwritten and three typed, and it works for me. Everybody says, "I want to learn how to dictate it." It'd be great if we could dictate a book, right? We could dictate 150,000 words into a book take 2 days to do it, and then go home and do something else. But no, the written word is different than the printed word, or written word is different than the spoken word. Also, I just like the process. I sit there, you can have a cup of coffee in one hand and my pencil in the other. And it's not two-handed like it is when you type. And I say I've written 23 books, and every one of them has been handwritten initially. And the handwritten manuscripts, by the way, are at Boston University Library. Somebody at Boston University Library about 20 years ago called me up and they said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you have handwritten manuscripts for books. Where are they?" I said, "I don't know. They're in the attic. I don't know where they are. Find them, please send them to us." So they're archived at Boston University Library, all my handwritten manuscripts, which probably should have been burned anyway. But that's the process. And as far as the time of day, 12 o'clock, 12 to 6, 12 to 7. I have had all-nighters. I'm sure you have too, Harlan, where you're on a roll. I've seen the sun come up still sitting at my desk because you're on a roll. You think you're on a roll, but then when you read it later, the stuff you wrote at 4 o'clock in the morning might not sound as brilliant as when you wrote it, or you think as you thought it was at 4 o'clock in the morning. At least you got something down on paper. And, I can kind of get, stimulated by coffee. It's coffee and a cigarette now and then, or a cigar, and never alcohol. And that's my routine. And again, if you're on the roll, you keep it going. There's nobody ever stopped. I don't think there's any writer ever stopped at a point where he was really feeling like he was really cooking with gas. Writer's block, yeah, maybe. I don't get writer's block. I don't know if you do. Writer's block is an excuse for not writing, but if you this is what you're there for. You're supposed to know what you're doing. But the writer's block, I think, is a cop out. If you have writer's block, drink a cup of black coffee and the block will go away. So, I am a night writer, and I used to do more of it when I was younger. But, now I kind of get home at a reasonable hour, and then next morning start again. And I do write 6 days a week when I'm at the end of the book, because the end of the book is like the term paper that you didn't do, that you had 6 months to do. And all of a sudden, here it is. You got 4 weeks left before they want the manuscript. And that's when you put in your 12 to 14-hour days. And it's good. I don't mind writing under pressure. And that's the way it's been for the last 40-some years. And everybody has good advice for me on how to do it differently. If you've got 40 years of bestsellers.
If you ask 10 writers how they do it, you get 11 different answers. That's what I've
right. Exactly.
If it creates words, good. If it doesn't create words, how simple the advice is. But you were saying you have sometimes 5 or 6 written drafts. So do you put like the old handwritten draft next to you again, or are these markings on the draft, the handwritten draft you have, and literally have one next to you and start writing another one?
Yeah, no, I go on. I mean, I get rid of the first draft, second draft. I don't really get rid of them. I put them in a box because apparently the Boston University Library wants to see them. But I try to move forward on it. And when it comes to the type, which I always print it out. I don't read from the screen. They're always printed out. So I have an old-fashioned printed manuscript in front of me, the way we used to work on years ago. But when I'm done with it, I just mark it done. But of course, at the end of the book, you've got to read it right through. And to read a full novel could be 16 to 18 hours. And I usually block out 2 days. And I'll start in the morning. And the best way to read it is, the long form. You can't be reading 3 or 4 chapters and putting it down. I'm trying to see at that point what the pacing is. With a movie, my son, who I'm co-authoring with, was in the movie business, screenwriter, and he said something interesting, that when you see a movie, especially in the theater, if it's a 90-minute movie, you're going to watch it in 90 minutes, and the pacing is inherent in the 90 minutes. But when you have a book, you don't know if that reader's picking that book up, reading chapter 1, putting it down, going to work, and then coming back 3 days later or something and reading 7 chapters, or reading at night, or reading when he or she is half asleep, or they took it to the beach and they actually did read it in 2 days. You have no idea how they're reading the book, how they're parsing it out. So the pacing, and also the scenes that were key scenes might be forgotten by the reader who could have started the book a month ago. So you have to be a little bit redundant, but not too redundant. And you try to guess how people are reading this. And sometimes an editor will say to me, "You're being redundant." I said, "No, you read it in 2 sittings, but the reader hasn't really. You don't know how the reader's going to read it. You got to be a little bit redundant." So it's writing a novel is always a challenge. And at the end of the day, I sit down, I read it in 2 days, I make my final. I don't want to see it again. You can over edit, as you know. You can over edit. You have to second guess yourself. And you say, should I have said this? Maybe I should have said something else. Don't get too clever. Just give it that final read. Put your reader's hat on. I'm a reader. I just bought this book. Cost me $30. Do I like this book? And then you send it off to your editor with a note, as you know, saying, "I am finished. Doesn't need any real editing." Checks in the mail, right now. But then you go through the editorial process, and somebody sees something different that you never saw. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes there's a plot, hole, or there's something that could have been said better. And I'm open. I've been doing this for 45 years, but I'm open to editorial suggestions, as long as there's not too many of them. So we've been in this business at the same time, so we've been through these.
Let's do the next
before.
one.
Yeah.
Yes, we're neither one of us are rookies here. All right, Henry in Wisconsin, who wants to know, outside of writing, what do
I do? Is that the question?
Outside of writing?
Yeah.
I always find this a tough question too.
What do I do? Well, I mean, I like travel. I have a 15-year-old, and that's a challenge. And it's mostly I don't know. What do I do? What are my hobbies? Mostly travel. Travel is good. Dinner with friends like everybody else. I hang out at maybe 2 more bars than I should hang out at, but I justify it because I get so much information. But I really do. I hang out at bars that, ADAs, assistant district attorneys, cops, lawyers, and where my house is not too far from the county seat. And most of the bars are full of people who have to do with the law or, law enforcement. And it's kind of interesting to go to a pub, sit at the bar, and listen to America, so to speak. And the language changes too. I mean, we've been around a while, and my son, who I write with now, is 44, and his what do you call it? His vocabulary is a little bit different than mine. So I listen to him too, because you don't want to sound like you're a writer of a certain age. You want to sound contemporary up to a point. So the language changes. You got to change a little bit with it. Although, I go back to my earlier books, and the first one was By the Rivers of Babylon, 1978, and I think it still holds up. It still reads well. And what do I do when I'm not writing? I don't read. I don't pretend that I'm a big reader. I read nonfiction because I have to, for research for my books. I like the beach. I play a little tennis, and I do research in bars.
The next question we have is from Virginia, who's from Texas. Now, you have such a dedicated following of your books, and we can't wait for your new material. 15 to 30-second videos are popular with the younger generation, and as an author who's dedicated your career to writing, what are your thoughts about how to become lifelong readers? It's a long question, but a reader. So I'm reading Virginia's question from Texas.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
You mean, how do you get young people to write, or to read, rather, not to write so much, but to read? Is that kind of the question?
To read, I guess, in this case, because they're so used to, there's videos on TikTok and all that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, no, I get it.
I don't really probably do much.
Right. No, but I have a 15-year-old, so I get it, and
how do we get them to read?
Yeah, you make them read. It's that simple. I give my 15-year-old books to, classics. But I give them short classics. I've given them 1984 and Animal House. I gave them All Quiet on the Western Front. I gave them Catcher in the Rye. These are great books, and they're short, so they feel. And because I'm sensitive to the short format. These kids have very short attention spans because of what the question is about. It's sort of like they don't have the long attention span that that you need to bring into a novel, and also the novel is obviously not interactive. You got to put yourself into that book rather than the thing is not coming back at you. And I think there's an age-old question: how do you get? This is a question I remember from when I was a kid, when TV first came out. Oh, these kids are watching TV; they're never going to read again. But I think every generation finds its way, and reading might not be as prevalent as it was when we were younger, but people go through the stages of life too. And I didn't do a lot of reading in high school and college, to be quite honest. I didn't start reading until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I really came to, to fiction later in life. I only read in college what I had to read. And I know as people get older too, they find, they find some solace or some, quiet in reading a novel. And during COVID, as you know, and I've discussed this before, people, I'm sure you saw the same thing, book sales went up. My backlist, your backlist, every author, we don't want to plague in order to have our sales go up, but that was a direct result of, it wasn't a coincidence that during COVID, all our old books, the paperbacks, sales went through the roof in some cases. Why? Because people were home. They had a chance to watch TV. They had a chance to do a lot of things. But why did they turn to novels instead of electronics? I have no idea. Somebody should, think about it and do a study on it. But people wanted to read. They wanted to bury themselves in a book, and there's no place better to bury yourself than in a novel. It transports you someplace else, away from where you are. In this case, it was, COVID. So that was kind of interesting. I think there's something to be learned there. What it is, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I actually had a book come out March in COVID, pretty much when it first was happening. and of course, sales were down
Right.
the first couple of weeks back as people started to have to find what they were going. Plenty of time to read, which leads to Haley from Maryland. I know your background somewhat, so we can talk about this a little bit. But what made did you always know when you were 3 years old? Did you know when you were in Vietnam? When did you first start knowing you wanted to be an author?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I never really thought about being an author, but I enjoyed reading. My father was a great reader. He was Canadian who had a Canadian education, which was heavy on the British classics, and he used to push them on me, and it was okay. I learned how to read British, and I kind of enjoyed reading. Enjoyed reading what I had to read, but maybe didn't go too much beyond that. But then I went in the Army for 3 years after college, and I was in Vietnam for one of those years. So I came back thinking, like a lot of men who come back from war, who are educated, I'm going to write the great American war novel. I am going to be Norman Mailer. I'm going to be James Jones. These are the people I grew up on. So I grew up on a lot of World War II novels, some good, some not so good. So I thought it was kind of cathartic too. And I sat down and I wrote, for the first time, I wrote something that I thought was, publishable, that I wanted to be published. It never really was in that format. But it got me into writing. It got me into the writing game. And I had living in New York is good because you get to know editors socially and all that. If you lived in Dubuque, you probably wouldn't run into an editor at a cocktail party, but I ran into an editor who actually served in the military. And we decided I should write a police procedural, which I did in 1974, and it was published as a paperback original. We don't even talk about those books, but it got me, it's like good on-the-job training. And then in 1978, I published By the Rivers of Babylon. But I think had it not been for the war experience, had it not been knowing people in the publishing business, I don't think I would have become a novelist. I would have probably just stayed a reader. These are kinds of things that you don't think you could ever do. Everybody has big dreams, but being a best-selling novelist was not one of my big dreams. But it was the idea of writing a war memoir that really set me down. And I found, and I guess I should say this too, I found the process easier than I thought. Writing fiction, well, this was nonfiction, of course, but then I wrote fiction afterward, came easy to me. Some people struggle with the written word, and I couldn't believe how easy I found it. But I also saw that in college. I had a lot of professors would say you write well. You obviously didn't do the homework or you didn't do the study, but you write well. And I actually had one professor, it was English, and it was kind of like medieval English. It was even earlier, it was like Beowulf. I did a paper on Beowulf. And the professor actually accused me of plagiarism. And I didn't plagiarize. It was my words. But I was I was insulted, but I was also flattered that he thought that I had taken this from somebody else. I said, no, this is me. This is how I write. And I kind of put that aside. But then when I sat down to actually do it, to write the novel, read one novel and a memoir at the same time, I was trying to do both. I found it was easier than I thought. Maybe, I don't know if you feel the same. If it's a struggle, it's going to look like a struggle on the page, and it's not going to look good. But when it comes easily, the reader's going to see that you felt comfortable doing this. So I said, well, this is not so difficult. I mean, if I could actually make money at this, maybe this is what I'll do. And my first hardcover novel, By the Rivers of Babylon, was a huge bestseller, and it was a Book of the Month Club main selection, and it was a Reader's Digest condensed book, and foreign sales. And I said, boy, this is easy. This beats going to the office, right?
The only one who describes it as easy. But I do, here's the or not. There's some days when I'm writing when it does flow very easy.
Right.
But there's also some days when it's hard, and each word I feel like I have a patient, that could kill a horse. But when I
Right.
look back at when the book comes out, I remember what I wrote on the bad days. I remember what I wrote on the good days. You know, you reread. So the lesson I always try to teach myself is, even if it doesn't feel right, keep writing. Stuff comes out.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it's flowing easily, that's not necessarily the good stuff.
Yeah,
I guess
that's right.
not necessarily great.
It's not easy. We know it's not easy, but there are easy days. But, you know, you have to step back and say, you know, we're lucky we're doing this because
The luckiest.
we are lucky we're doing this. There are other things we could be doing that are not as fulfilling. And the nice thing is you can make your own day. You can make your own hours. You make your own life. That has its pitfalls too, as a lot of writers find. I try to approach it as a discipline, maybe not a job, but a discipline where I've got to be there. And if you do that, and I don't have my office in the house, so that's kind of self-defeating. Because when you're in the house, you're not. Even during COVID, I went to my office, which is 5 blocks from my house, but there was nobody in the building. The building was empty except for me, and I actually got a lot of writing done. But you got to treat it that way. You know, you get up in the morning, you know, shower, shave, put on some decent clothes, and walk to the office. I sometimes I walk 5 blocks, and then you sit in the room all by yourself and tell yourself stories all day. And, but when you say, what, you know, like this totally sucks, then you got to think, you know, no, it doesn't really, you know. But we've been doing it for so long, we can find problems with everyday writing. But ultimately, there are hundreds of thousands of people who envy us. They want to be writers. They want to be published. And that's what I keep reminding myself. What am I complaining about? Well, we complain anyway, because why not? You know?
We can complain to each other, but none of the people
Right.
who are listening to this live stream are going to want to hear about our
No, they don't want to
champagne
hear it.
problems. Yeah, I mean, our champagne problems of, face it, being a best-selling novelist is the greatest job in the world. I mean, why? But it's the best. All right, let me see. Savannah from Utah has a question. Question is, well, any advice to new authors? There's people out there that are watching right now, write the great American novel or whatever we write. So, what is to be a writer?
Well, the famous advice is, if you feel like writing, take 2 aspirin, lay down in the dark room, and wait for the feeling to pass. You know, but you know, I mean, this is what I say to every young writer, and even older writer. You got to read. You have to read different kinds of things, because within the reading is the answers you're looking for. If you can read for entertainment, but if you have aspirations to be a writer, now you're reading it differently. This is what I started to do. I was reading, you know, I read a lot of Robert Ludlum before I started writing, and I was, you know, very entertained by it. But then when I started writing myself, I was reading Ludlum differently. I was saying, how did this guy do this? And what, you know, like, some very clever stuff in there, and we didn't recognize it as clever because he was reading for entertainment. But you know, it's a great training ground. If you know, it's like if you're an athlete, you're going to go out on the field and train. But you got to do a lot of reading, and there's got to be different kinds of reading: male, female, different epics, different periods, and that'll get the brain where the brain needs to be, so that when you sit down to be a writer, you are already an accomplished reader, and that's my best advice.
So I'm going to remind you, premiercollectibles.com, select back a copy of The Maze. Let's dig into The Maze itself. This is a venture. It is something of a sequel, I think, to Plum Island, though I don't think
right.
to understand it. It also is based a little bit on a real case. Do you want to discuss that?
Yeah, you know, it is based on the Gilgo Beach murders. This, you know, The Gilgo Beach murders became kind of national too. I mean, I had national interest, and partly because of just the nature of them, and people are always interested in serial killings for some reason. But also, again, there was some TV documentaries made and some books out on it. And it's unusual that a local crime becomes nationally known. But I personally found it fascinating because I live here, and I'm trying to picture this nice kind of suburban island, a lot of it affluent, and you find out that there are sex workers out there, and that 10 of them were murdered. One of the things I tried to do in the book was to show that even though they were sex workers, that their lives were worth something. They were murdered, and they needed justice. And there's a lot of criticism of the police, like the police don't care because these are sex workers. That's not true. It's not true at all. Police cared professionally. They wanted to find the murderer or murderers. And two, they were, I think, sensitive too, because these women did have families. Some of the families came forward of the women who were identified. They were trying, and I think it was unfair criticism that the police were letting it go. Like 10 murders go. It doesn't matter who they are. So, I tried to bring that out, that you cared about these people, and also the public, in another way, had this morbid curiosity about who the murderer was, because the murders took place so close to the Hamptons and Fire Island, which are kind of trendy places, that I think the general public was hoping that it was a very high-profile person, like somebody rich and famous who was killing these prostitutes. So this all comes out in the book. But like all unsolved cases, when you fictionalize it, you got to come up with a conclusion, because it was fictionalized. It's just so our boy John Corey, finds the bad guys at the end, although in real life they're still out there.
Do you have any actual case itself when you were doing your research or writing it? Did you come up with these that maybe either surprise us or don't surprise us?
Did I come up with any suspects of my own? Do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not on my own, but I mean, I have good access with the Suffolk County Police Department, and I had a little access with the FBI. The FBI also investigated the murders, and other people. A lot of retired police will talk a lot more freely than people still on the job. There were a couple of suspects, and there were a couple of people we call persons of interest. And one of them, I picked it out in my book, and I can say it here, is James Burke, who was the Suffolk County Chief of Police. He was a suspect. He was the head cop. And the theory was, or the suspicion was, that these murders weren't being solved because he was hindering the investigation. He stonewalled the FBI. He didn't want the FBI involved. He said it was a turf thing and this is his jurisdiction. But other people said, no, there's more to it than that. He knows who did this. He might not have done it himself, but he knows who did it. So, like every crime, it sort of focuses or puts a spotlight on society in general. And these crimes actually did bring out a lot of other things that were going on in the county, which is, again, an affluent county. They don't expect this kind of thing. There's a lot of corruption. There was some police corruption. The DA wound up going to jail for something else. I mean, the county district attorney and James Burke went to jail for something else. But a lot of corruption, a lot of kind of negligence was uncovered because of these 10 murders, and still not solved. But there are, but everybody plays private detective. Everybody plays, armchair detective. So there's 10 people in this county, who were involved, either involved or were interested in the case, and they'll have 10 different suspects. So as long as one of them is not me, I don't care.
There's two sort of schools of thought. One is the people who outline that's going to happen before they start writing. The others are what they call the pantsers. They know nothing. People know the ending before they start, but very little in between. What are you? How do you do it? The idea, or do you know the ending? Do you outline before you, Nelson?
Yeah, I do it all different ways, and some books inherently you're going to know the ending to, and you got to, go toward that ending. Some of them, like The General's Daughter, which was an old-fashioned whodunit, an army murder, and the Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division, investigated it. But I treated it as a whodunit, and I'm not really used to writing whodunits, real mysteries, classic mysteries. I didn't know what the ending was. I didn't know who the murderer was myself. I had to kind of come up with something. I had to go back and tweak. With The Maze, the new one, I kind of knew that the last scene was going to be, without giving away too much, no spoilers, but the last scene takes place in a hedge maze. It's a shootout in a hedge maze. This is always a great scene when you got the hedge maze, like in The Shining, when people are running through the hedge maze and coming around a corner and running into each other, that type of thing. That was my final scene, and I knew that this was going to be the big scene at the end, the denouement. But I had to get there. So sometimes I start off with a great premise. Now I know how it's going to start. Or, we've all read novels with great opening scenes. They really are great opening scenes, and the novel goes downhill real fast after that. So I write in different genres. So different genres lend themselves to either good outlines or just leave it open and follow. It's good to have a roadmap, but it's also good to go off the road once in a while when you see an opportunity. Yeah.
Cool. All right, it's turning to a little after 7:45, so I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to also ask you one more time and remind you. /Maze. The Maze just came out on Tuesday. Very exciting. It's a great book. The Maze, I guess, the hedges at the end of the book. Nelson,
I'm supposed to hold
I
gotta hold the book up.
Yes, I would.
If I don't do that, I get
it,
into trouble.
Mr. here. For not having my copy, though, I got an advanced copy. So,
right.
Burn. So Nelson, final thing. Let's talk about, where are you going to go on book tour, and what do you have planned next? On.
Well, yeah, book tour. We're doing a book tour. Nobody's toured since COVID, as you know. This might be, now this season, I think, is the first of the big book tours again. My website is nelsondemille.net, nelsondemille.net. And then if you look at that, you can click to where the tour is and see if I'm going to be in your area. I'm here, I'm there. It changes once in a while, so, keep on it. And doing a lot of local signings in the New York metro area, but also going to different cities around the country. And it's kind of fun. We've both done this. And, Holland and I used to sit around a table with a bunch of other authors. We had an authors round table.
Yeah,
and
I missed that.
I kind of missed it since COVID, and we used to complain about everything under the sun. But we also talked about book tours. Everybody had a funny book tour story. They're interesting. I've done so. This is my 23rd book, so I've done 23 tours, and I swear that everyone is going to be the last one, and I'm still doing them. The good part is you get to see your readers. I mean, this is an amazing thing to wind up in, Chicago or LA and to see people who are there to see you because you wrote a book that they liked. That's really rewarding. And some of the questions from the audience are kind of interesting. So, it's a little bit of it's a slog, but it's worth it at the end of the day. And I'm doing this for this book and nelsondemille.net. And my tour is posted somewhere in that website.
Yeah, Dan Folk saying the audience is heavenly, but the traveling is hell.
Yeah,
I think that's where it's not. There's no greater honor that people show up and show up and ask you to sign a book and tell you they love their book. That's not hard work. Nelson and I share a genuine appreciation for our readers. We appreciate those who tuned in tonight, and we thank you. I don't know if somebody needs for us to say goodbye. Nelson and I are also not very good with technology, as you can found on my side. I'm actually in a trailer filming a TV show which I had today, so I apologize for that to my friend Nelson and to everybody else, and say good night. Thank you all very, very much. Take care.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.